Hello and welcome to the Glad You Knew Football Podcast. I'm Reece Ryan, and here with me is Evan Urbina and Nicholas Gabriel. This week we speak with an absolute stalwart and gentleman of the game, David Webb. He is an imitable man with an infectious humility, and we couldn't help ourselves but admire David even more after this exhilarating and enthralling chat. We learn about how his masters in psychology helped build the foundations of his incredible understanding of footballers. He tells us the experiences that were pivotal throughout his career, from Bournemouth to Wimbledon, and the experience that shaped his early career at Bayer Leverkusen. So much insight and so many stories that I think you'll be glad you knew David Webb. So, let's get stuck in with another Glad You Knew Football Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, our evening, David. Just going through your resume earlier, it feels like you've got more stories than the Bible or the Quran. I don't know, whatever floats your boat here. But how did you fall in love with football?
From an early age, really, from about 2-3 years of age, I just found myself kicking a football around the garden. My dad was he was a good amateur player, so was my uncle, my granddad. They were all sort of big football people, and the sort of ball fell at my feet and continued it from there. Played football as a kid, got into Crystal Palace as a young player. Was there till I was about 20, didn't make the grade, stayed in amateur football for a little bit, semi-pro. And then wanted to stay in the game. So I decided to go down the coaching and scouting route.
I myself, I'm a physio student currently. And at the moment, there's tons of research about sports psychology and the importance of sports psychology and how psychology has an impact on injury. You've obviously done a master's in sports psychology. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of psychology in sport and where it's going in the future?
Yeah, the reason why I wanted to do that, I did it sort of maybe 10, 11 years ago now. I wanted to do it to help enhance my sort of qualification credentials at the time, because I'd got my coaching badge here in the UK, which was the A license, which is the highest you could get without doing the pro. And then I was kind of looking. I knew I could see the way the game was going a little bit in terms of, this was 2009-10, in terms of more sports science, more psychology based, rather than just having your sort of standard qualifications. I was always interested in, from a talent identification point of view, the characteristics of players. So what makes them tick, their backgrounds, their social. So as well as looking at the talent on the pitch, I wanted to really go into depth, because the levels I wanted to achieve, I knew that there could be a difference, as well as having all your live scouting reports, your data and everything that supported that. What was the player like? What was he social like? What was his character like? What were certain characteristics were like on the pitch? Because data is quite led by certain things they do on the pitch. So I wanted to know more in depth about that, so I could learn more about sort of the playing side, more about the humanistic side of players.
That human side sounds so important though, David. I'm sure there would be a few heartbreak stories just hearing about your early career at Crystal Palace. Did that help later on when you started scouting and coaching and having to knock back players?
Yeah, it did really, because when I was doing it, I'm a little bit older now, so the game's completely different, and the way I trained and the way it was back then, it was a lot. It wasn't so the big academy support system. There was probably not so much on sports science. You probably didn't have the infrastructure you got now at clubs, so it did impact the way for me to give myself a more rounded knowledge of, especially to help, especially my early career, because I worked a lot with youth players to help young players get through that process. Because even before they get to that age where they decided to be a pro, they have to go through an academy system 9 to 16, where year on year they judge whether they can continue their their next year, the next 2 years. So, and that's quite a lot, especially for young players to handle. So I really wanted to sort of help, especially the younger players, through that process a little bit and get a more understanding and sort of draw my experiences from it, because it's not a pleasant experience, but sometimes it's your talent. You're just not good enough, and you have to accept that. And sometimes football, it can be a various multitude of reasons, and whatever them reasons are, I just want to equip myself with, a good knowledge base so I could lend that support when needed.
No, it's so challenging, I think, for players coming through the system now, as well, with the pressure of social media and so many other facets in our world in 2020. But how would you say that clubs actually go about supporting the young talent that's coming through at the moment?
Yeah, I say they do. I say they do very well at that now, a lot better than probably what they did maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago, because you have a lot more on the educational side. Obviously, like you mentioned, social media is really big now. So, and I think it's a lot more aware of players' sort of feelings and understandings, and knowing that, especially if you're at the top clubs. So give an example, when I was at Tottenham, we wanted to bring as many young players through as we could. And, obviously there's only so much room you can have. So what will be the next process for them? So you want to make sure they're well educated, they're well equipped, and also give them the best chance to maybe, you've got better relationships now with clubs so they can get more loan exposure. So if they're not going to make it at your club, then you want to try and help them get another club, whether that be in the UK or somewhere else. So, and then sort of manage their sort of welfare and their expectations as they're leading up to that as well. So that was always a harsh one, because sometimes young players don't know where they are sort of in the pecking order, unless they're training with the first team. It's quite obvious, but if they're continuing with the 18s or under 23s, they don't know sort of where the next progression is going to go. So it's always best to sort of give them those expectations early, where you see them, where you can see their pathway and their development, and think, well, you could potentially be a first team player in 2 years, but we want to try and help you get there. So maybe you might need to be loaned to smaller clubs to get more sort of experience and game time and minutes on the pitch and playing time, and exposed to a different environment. So especially at Tottenham, where you're very privileged, you might have to go to clubs where, the facilities maybe is not as grand. The environment is going to be a little bit tougher, and that's going to be sort of more, give you more reality of the world of football, rather than, coming into a world-class training ground every day. So it's a case of just managing them as people and where they are. So they can't come to you in 2-3 years' time and say to you, well, you just left me, you didn't know where I was on my journey. Then they've got a clear pathway. They get to understand where they are, where their football talent is, which levels they might be able to achieve, and then you've got a process to help them, try and achieve that.
Do you almost think Jamie Vardy's almost the embodiment of what you just said? Because the players these days coming through would take so many ego hits going to a club that's got just 2 goals, an old grandstand, and one elderly lady waving the flag, cheering them on. It's not easy. But who do you think is the best embodiment of this?
I think someone like that, Harry Kane, was excellent, because if you looked at his journey, and when I was at Tottenham previously, I worked with Harry as a young player, and you could see he had talent, and you could see a good technical quality. He had a good work rate and effort, but he wasn't one of the main crop. And you were talking when he was sort of 14 and 15. But what he did have was a fantastic attitude, work rate, and a resilience. So his loan spells included somewhere like Leyton Orient, Millwall, which are quite tough environments, and he done well there. And he experienced sort of a little bit of rejection when he went to Leicester, when he didn't really play. He went to Norwich on loan, and he really took on the whole sort of journey of what it's going to take to come back to maybe be a Premier League player. that you're going to have to go down to come back up. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to maybe play football that doesn't suit your style of play, and just take it on. And the references that he received from all those clubs, that he was, his work rate was good. He had a fantastic attitude. He embraced the environment he was in. He became one of the lads, and that sort of gives of where he is now, because he went through that process and he succeeded, and that was purely because of his work rate and because of his attitude.
So on the topic of Harry, how was it working with him for you personally?
In terms of Harry's, what do you mean?
Just his demeanor, just his character, and I don't know, just your relationship with him.
Yeah, as a young, I worked with him as a young player, so his attitude then was first class, because he would be the first to training. He would want to stay behind. He was like what we call a very good learner. He asked a lot of really good questions from a young player, so you could see that he was really, he really wanted to progress, even at a young age, where some young, especially at 15, 16, where some young players, they want to finish training and go home. That's their time done. He didn't. He had to take a little bit different, and I think that attitude took him to where he is now, because he still continues that work rate. He still continues to watch him in games. If you still, when I went to Tottenham, and I was at Tottenham the second time, and when I was here with Mauricio, when he was coaching him, he was still the same. He was still the same he was when he was 15. He still embodied these same sort of characteristic qualities that I think that the top players have. They're very, very resilient. They're so one-dimensional, focused on their own process, their own goals, their own achievements. They work hard for the team, but they're so driven, and you don't see that very often with top players. And Harry will continue probably to have that until the end of his career.
He's just a superstar, really. However, speaking about the drive, and I was looking again through your resume, and I was just staggered by how incredible it is, David. And I also heard when you were younger, you went to Bayer Leverkusen. Was this where you realized that you saw a change in the game? Was through the experiences of going to Germany?
Yeah, it was definitely. I wanted to learn football from, being in the UK from a European perspective, and I was always fascinated with German, especially Dutch, Spanish football, and I was doing my academy manager's license at the time, and to achieve that course, you had to do a European visit, and I went to Bayer Leverkusen, and you had to do a 3-day visit. But what fascinated me about that process was it wasn't just a visit where you just went and spoke to members of staff, how the club worked. It was they kind of got me involved early, so I had the privilege of coaching some of their under-17 players. I went to scouting tournaments, and through that scouting tournament I went to, because I was doing my masters at the time, they was fascinated the way I looked at players. I don't know if it was a compliment at the time, or they said, you're not, you don't look at it typical English, so you're very detailed. You think about the whole situation. And at the time I was working at Millwall as youth coordinator. And through that process, Rudy Voller, who was the technical director at the time, he said, look, we'd like you to continue to do some work for us on the sort of young European players. We really like what you do when you're looking into the depth, the character, and you sort of amalgamize them all together. And Millwall accepted that. So I got the opportunity to do some consulting work for sort of a massive club and keep my role at Millwall at the same time. And it kind of really got me thinking about, the entity of coaching, scouting, and looking at it a completely different way to what I'd been used to. And I was always a keen learner. So I was always reading and studying, and every opportunity I got to go to another club or another business, another sport, and I still do now, I really want to learn. So that really I suppose that did change my dimension of how I took it into my recruitment career and how I really wanted to sort of identify players.
No, it's amazing. They didn't think you were English, David. I'm quite surprised they didn't think you were David Williams. Has that ever popped up? Have you ever turned up to an interview and they've gone, "Oh, Simon and the Britain Got Talent and David, you got to have to go next door"?
Yeah.
Never happened.
No.
Oh no! But when you think about the journey and the ups and downs that you've had, and the experiences that you had in Germany with Bayer Leverkusen, has it been everything that you imagined of your entire career as well?
No, you mentioned it's been very up and down, which it has, because it's I started back in 2001. Working in sort of the old Wimbledon, which is AFC Wimbledon now. Just when I first started my coaching journey, coaching in schools, coaching in the community, and I had to work my way all the way up, and it took many bumps in the road. It's not always been a straightforward journey where you've gone from job to job and it's elevated like a nice easy road. I was my first probably 15 interviews to go full time in football. I never actually got the jobs. So because from 2001 to 2005-06, I was part time, but I was desperate to come into full time football. And at the time, I had a little bit of a playing background, but nothing sort of major. So it was just having that sort of resilience just to keep going. And the jobs I went for was a multitude of different jobs, from youth coordinators, head of recruitments, and these are all youth-based jobs in academies and stuff. And I still keep the letters today, sort of as a reminder, really, because I get asked this question a lot, that it can be such a brutal industry. It's such a niche market for, especially the jobs of sports directors or head coaches or, really big jobs. There's not many available, and the skill set you need to have to be successful in those now is quite demanding and quite unique. So I think these sort of bumps in the road and these little glimpses and not getting jobs and, being able to sort of pick yourself up and keep going again and again and again has, been really helpful.
Just speaking about, obviously, your journey to getting to where you are now, I think in Australia we have a bit of a shallow understanding of football. I hope people don't mind me saying that. Where we think there's a coach, say 20 odd players, and that's it. There's no one in between. Can you tell us what like a day-to-day is for you, or what type of work you do as a technical director or even as a head of football? Like, what's the ins and outs of your jobs? Because I think people just think that they're just another coach, but obviously they're much different to that.
Yeah, they are. The primary role is, the roles are very different at each club, but they sort of overlap and they do sort of cover a lot. So your main job is to support the whole process of the club. So, for example, at Huddersfield, it was under new ownership when I came in, and it wanted to go into a new direction, new philosophies, new DNA. So my role is to amalgamate that all together from the footballing side as a club. So my first role was to help the ownership appoint a new manager that fitted those sort of philosophies and values. Once that's in place, then is to work with the footballing departments, from sports science, player recruitment, academy, medical, sort of the women's football, everything really, and to try and align them all together. So the manager's or the head coach's job is to coach the main football team. And our philosophy at Huddersfield was to try and incorporate some younger players into that as well, to give them the opportunity to come through. So we wanted coaches that sort of bought into that process as well. And in essence, the sporting director's job is to maintain that. So, for example, if the head coach or if the manager leaves or is relieved of his duties, then that whole club alignment stays as one. That whole philosophy and DNA stays as one. So your next coach or your next manager that comes into that whole process. So you're not continuously keep changing your whole your whole philosophy to suit, a manager style. A club is much bigger than a manager or a head coach. So and there's enough head coaches and managers out there that will come in and buy into what you want and try and, get you there in a successful way, but doing it, the way you want it to be done as a football club. And I think financially it's better. It keeps the philosophy strong so staff understand the values of the club, especially the younger players coming through. They're sort of ingrained from a very early age. So no matter what coach or manager comes in, they know that there's always a realistic opportunity for them to break through. And that's part of your role as well, to recruit certain players that fit into that as well. And part of the process was to get players that not only fitted it, that you could develop and then maybe sort of set on for the future and keep the conveyor belt going through. So, because Huddersfield in particular, we'd like to call it as a trading club. So it's never going to sustain the sort of the financial impact that a Chelsea, a Tottenham and Arsenal will have when they can hold on to their big players. Once the players become at a certain point, a certain level, they hit their peak. Your job is then to have sort of a filter system underneath that you can bring the next one through. If you don't have it in your system, then you can go out and purchase that. So, and all the footballing departments have to sort of buy into this one system. So your job is kind of essentially it's like strategizing the whole club, giving support to the manager when needed, and to maintain that ethos and values all the way through.
So a jack of all trades, basically.
You have to be, and you have to be, and you're also, another good one is you have to, sort of a main one is you're a link sometimes between the manager and the board and senior level and ownership. So you can buffer in between. So your job is to keep that relationship sometimes smooth as much as you can. So obviously the manager wants to win football games, he's under a certain amount of pressure. The owner wants to do it a certain way. So sometimes they can veer off track a little bit, which is perfectly normal in football. And your role then is in the middle, is to keep that as sound as possible and on course as much as you can.
Not easy though.
No, of course it's never easy. It's never easy. That's one of the biggest challenges you have, because obviously you've got an owner that wants to go in a certain direction. The manager will feel pressure at certain times, even though he buys into your philosophies and the way the club wants to work. He's still under sort of a huge amount of pressure if results are not going his way. If he's got certain injuries that are impacting his squad, and he can't do what he needs to do on the training ground. I think your role then is as when you become really supportive, and then you really earn your money in terms of that, especially in the sort of recruitment markets as well, because your job is to keep is to recruit players that are going to have an impact on the club. But you also want them to have an impact on the squad and the first team. So when you're recruiting players, you're not just recruiting because, the left back is injured. You also, yes, you might need a left back, but also that type of left back you might need has to be fit into the way you want to recruit. So a certain age parameters, he has to have certain qualities. And then, you've got to do certain due diligence on it. And then it has to have certain tick points. So for a manager, he just might want a left back to do a job, but your job is to say, okay, I understand that, but here's 3 or 4 left backs that we need to look at, because this is where we are as a football club, and we think they're the best that are going to fit into the the playing style, the philosophy, etc.
I love how you said a left back. Wasn't that your first signing at Huddersfield? Was Danny Simpson?
Yeah. He could play sort of right and left back. So he was at the time we felt we needed a little bit of experience into it, even though we wanted to recruit mainly sort of younger players, sort of between 17 and 24. But we felt that the club hadn't won a game of football, I think, since January. And when a team sort of comes down from the Premier League into the Championship, you've got, certain players that will see their career aspirations somewhere else, either back in the Premier League or other European clubs. So sometimes your squad can be a little bit disassembled in terms of players might want to see themselves here. Some players want to stay and fight for the cause. So we felt we needed sort of a real stronger character in there that have been there, seen it, done it. Obviously, he's been in that sort of level at the Championship before, where he's won promotion. He's been at Leicester with the Premier League. So we felt he would not only offer from the playing side a really strong sort of personality to the group and help some of we had a promising young right back coming through as well. And we thought he'd be fantastic for him to learn off as well. So there was, there was a little bit of thinking, just because we were short on that position, but we also thought that he could help blossom our, younger one coming through as well.
Always can never go wrong with experience. And what I'm trying to gain experience from at the moment is the buzzword philosophy. And you spoke about it before, and it feels like everyone has a philosophy on how they want to play football. And who actually decides what the philosophy is of a club? Because you probably go on in to, say, Huddersfield or Ostersunds with a philosophy, but then the club wants to do something totally different. Then the fans, I can only think of West Ham, and they want to play the West Ham way, but I don't know what that actually means, and people throw away so many terms like this. Yeah, they do. How do you actually do it?
Yeah, I think historically clubs have got certain, like you said, West Ham or Tottenham, have got certain traditions and expectations of why they want to play. They want to see their team perform on the pitch. And I think for me, it's understanding the environment you're going into. So Huddersfield's philosophy and recruitment strategy and the way they wanted to develop was completely different to at Tottenham, completely different to at Ostersunds. And as me, in my role, you have to be totally adaptable. So I might have my own personal philosophy on that, but I've got to make sure that when I enter these clubs that my values are, not completely compromised, that they're still sort of aligned in some way. So even though the playing style might be, different on the pitch, which they are, that the core values that you have inside of you are going to be similar to the club you're working at, because if they're completely different, you're never going to be able to, do your job to the highest standard possible. So something like Ostersunds, I kind of knew the philosophy as I was going in, to what the strategy was, and I liked their strategy. So their strategy was to essentially recruit players that have been at top clubs from an early age, at 16, 17, 18, that hadn't quite made it. And Ostersund was a platform to give them a second chance. So, and they wanted to play a certain way because they had that from Graham Potter previously. So I kind of knew what I was going into, and I was happy with that. And I thought, yes, I can help with that. I can enhance it, help you improve it and drive it forward. And I think as a sort of sporting director or head of football, you've got to look at a club and think, Huddersfield's a club in, the north of England. It has real working class roots and values. Can you go in and help impact this club? Because sometimes you have to be honest with yourself and say, maybe I can't actually help you, because I think we're going in two different directions. But if you can sort of adapt the way you work and you have some core values and you think, yes, I can definitely help you, I think you have to sort of buy into what the club is about. And even the location of where it is can give you an idea of what the expectations are from the fans, the surrounding areas. You get a feel for that, and then you have to really sort of try and like ingrain that into you and try and help drive that forward.
The big question is on everyone's lips, David, Did you keep the ballet at Ostersunds like Graham Potter?
Yes, I was. I did. The ballet. It wasn't a ballet, but it was an end of year show. Because I started in October 2018, and the end of the season finished in November, and they did have an end of year show. Yeah, it wasn't a ballet. It was still performed in the same location. It was a bit of a mixed performance of singing, dancing, and it was more to do with the history of the town. Oh. But yeah, I got thrown into that quite quickly. There was no getting out of that.
Well, now you're in between jobs. You might be going on to Swan Lake.
Exactly. You know, I've never experienced anything like that before. But the owner's thinking behind it was quite clever, actually, because he said, "Look, yes, it's a very nice to do this for the town, and to a bit of entertainment and a bit of fun." But also for staff and players, it was to take them out of their comfort zone, because everyone was obviously really nervous. They're not, they're in the football industry. They're not in the dance industry. So to take them out of their comfort zone and put them on stage on the spotlight, and you're obviously under a certain amount of pressure, and it's a different type of pressure. So, and it was he said, well, if you can cope with this, then if you get to like when Ostersunds previously, before I was there, played Arsenal in the Champions League and Hertha Berlin, it was giving them the tools to say, well, you've handled this type of pressure, so transmit it into your football. So there was a method to his madness, even though not everyone enjoyed it because they didn't want to be in the spotlight, but it was good fun nevertheless.
Oh, we're just hearing word from our Swedish audience. Geez, they wanted an encore, I heard.
Did they? They're out of luck this morning.
What do you think is the main difference? The pressure for performers being on a stage and players playing in front of 70,000 before COVID? You'd think the pressure would be similar.
It would be, but I think in football they're in their natural habitat. Playing in front of crowds and stuff, they're used to it. They've been used to it for a long time. When you're asked to do something maybe that's not your natural talent, or start singing and dancing and acting, it's it takes them to places they're not usually comfortable with. So yeah, they're going to feel really nervous.
No, you smashed it here, David, by all accounts.
Yeah, I had to do my bit. It wasn't great. It wasn't my best performance, but I enjoyed it.
Oh, did you have any family watching?
No, thank God. No, thank God. No, plenty of pictures after, but no. But no, I didn't want anyone there. It was embarrassing.
We'll burn those photos. That's for sure. Keep the evidence quiet there, David.
Yeah. Don't expose them.
Well, bringing it back to you speaking about being adaptable, I was wondering, what is your greatest strength on bringing the adaptability to all the roles you've taken up?
I think one of my biggest strengths is sort of maybe resilience, and experience a little bit, because the resilience, knowing that where I've come from to where I've got to now, and knowing that I've probably in a way that earned the right to be there, in a way that I've gone through a multitude of different roles, sort of head of recruitment roles, head of coaching, and it's being resilient to the football industry, because when you get to that highest level, it's very tough. It can be very brutal. And I think having that knowledge, and probably even those setbacks and those failures throughout my career, and I'm still going to get them, going forward as well. I think it's understanding the football industry as it is, and understanding where I am now. And I'd say, it's just having that sort of mental strength and that sort of resilient strength of character, that every role you go into, that you have that wholehearted belief that you can go in and be successful. Your knowledge base is good enough to, help drive the club forward. Because I think if I didn't have that behind me, I think like in every role, people would question, are they good enough? Can they perform it? But I've always found football quite comfortable from that aspect, especially in terms of recruiting players. I can understand where players fit into certain clubs' environments quite quickly. So that's always given me an advantage because, I've had a really good, successful track record. So I'm assured and just resilient in what I do. I suppose it gives me that comfort in each role I take.
Sure, resilience would be so key as well. I'm sure you would have been influenced through all the managers that you've been with as well, David. However, what was it like working under Eddie Howe at the Cherries?
Yeah, I had a fantastic relationship with Ed. And that was, a really successful period for me personally, for the club, because at the time when I first joined, I was appointed head of recruitment for the first team, and Bournemouth itself had just come up from League One into the Championship. Year one didn't have really any expectations, and to get to grips with a role and get to grips with working with sort of a manager in that close proximity, it was quite a lot to take on all at once, because what we wanted to do was, year one was just surviving the Championship, but Ed had a really specific style of football that he wanted to play. That was the way he wanted to play. So my first job was to sort of try and build a recruitment department and system that supported that. So the players that we recruited would come in and help him. Him personally, he's very, very thorough in his work. He would be sort of first into the training ground and sort of last to leave. Very detailed in how he approached. I would say he was very good with people. So even though he was quite an intense character when it comes to football, he was very good with people in terms of about his staff and players. He wanted to know all about them as human beings. So, and that was what made him sort of a good manager as well, because we always said that Ed was a teacher on a training pitch, because when you watched him work with the players, his level of detail and knowledge and what he wanted to try and execute and the way he spoke and portrayed that was excellent. So he was always kind of a bit of a teacher, the way he sort of taught players. But outside of that, he was just a guy that wanted to know sort of his staff and his players personally as well. So their families, their interests, what made them tick, because he knew that, the training that he did was only was a big chunk of, what was going to help him develop. But if he could get into him and work with him on a personal side and help him improve as people as well as players, then that would give them and the club a better chance of success. So, it's Bournemouth itself. The journey was quite unique, because in the second year, we started to, especially with the players we recruited, we didn't have the biggest budget at the time. So we was kind of sort of below midway point. The players we recruited, players like Callum Wilson, Dan Gosling, Josh King, Boyd, Adam Smith, a lot of them are still there now. So, and that's testament to the club of how they valued not only them as players, but as people. And I think over the 2 years, Bournemouth spent under 5 million. And in the second year, won the Championship by quite a healthy margin, playing the football and the style that Eddie and the club wanted to achieve. So it felt like a real togetherness, that everyone, had their own expertise, had their own points. Eddie was the manager, he was the leader, he was driving it. We was like his support mechanisms, in a way. And it felt, for me personally, like a real big achievement, because in a way, Bournemouth, with the budget and the size of the club and the way it played, especially in the second year in the Championship. And the Championship's an extremely, extremely tough league. It's not like the Premier League where the top six ideally are going to be the top six. The Championship, anyone can beat anyone on any day. So to be that consistent over a period of 46 games was incredible. So I think for me personally, it was one of the small highlights of my career. I really enjoyed that time there.
Highlight for everyone in Bournemouth, and it's almost similar to Burnley in a way, contrasting styles though. But what I want to
Yeah.
ask, speaking of Eddie, why do you think he's never brought in the big players though? Say he's an amazing developer of people. I think you're a big believer in developing humans. Yet why hasn't there been a major signing? Because it felt like 5 years in the Premier League, Bournemouth were just going to just go along the one path. It never felt there was an optimism inside the Vitality, having been there a couple of times, that they were going to break the ceiling and maybe push for a Europa League spot.
Yeah, I think sometimes with, there's a multitude of reasons. They had, again, and this is what we talk about, sticking to your philosophies and the way you want to be as a football club. So to get the real top signings, even when I was at Tottenham, it's very hard to attract the top players, and Tottenham's a massive club. So at Bournemouth, they felt, still keeping a close relationship with them all. They still competed very well. They still paid good money for players like Jefferson Lerma was nearly 30 million, which was a massive amount of money for a club. But Bournemouth always had to, probably because of, in terms of the club, it wasn't the biggest in terms of the stadium and the stature and the history. And, you was always competing against many other factors, not just attracting the best players. So you still wanted to keep the values of, getting players in that were probably just underneath, that were good enough for the Premier League, that could help you go forward. And he felt players like Lerma and Ake and Callum Wilson all had these sort of qualities. So, and he still liked to develop players. So his aspirations were still, he could break into the top six, but he could still do it that way because they were still paying healthy amounts of fees for money. And that was Bournemouth, where they could, they didn't want to go and spend 50, 60 million on one particular player. They would rather invest, if they had 50, 60 million, 2 or 3 players for that could help improve the squad, help improve the group, and help improve other players, optimize their performance as well. So it was always quite a clever strategy, the way they wanted to, do it, and eventually build a squad. Because that squad that came through initially to the Premier League was mainly sort of League One, League Two players. So to impact on that, it was to bring players in. All of a sudden, if you bring a superstar in top of the group, that you've got them level of type of players, it's hard. So I think he done it the right way round. Speaking of obviously Eddie Howe, why do you think his dressing room was such a sacred place? Obviously, there was times in the really good season at Bournemouth when you could see the players were really fighting to the end and fighting to play for him. What was his knack or his kind of secret in the dressing room? I think his belief in the group, belief in players, belief in staff, and the way he wanted to play. He kind of stuck with it all the way to the end. And players like consistency; they like to know where they are, and they also like to be, they like to be valued and having that confidence that the manager's got the belief in them. So I think he never gave up on, he never panicked in terms of, right, okay, this is not working, I'm going to completely change everything. Because sometimes when you do that, you can lose a little bit of the dressing room from the players because they're thinking, well, if you don't believe in it, how are we going to believe in it? So to keep to the same principle, to play all the way to the end, showed a lot of courage, because with that, you're going to get a lot of buy-ins from players. Players will automatically buy into someone who believes in what they're doing rather than someone who panics when, they have a flurry of results that don't go their way. Just speaking about, obviously, the dressing room, not to be too dicey, but how easy it is to lose a dressing room in terms of your players? Is it over time, or is it just, one bad decision or a player kind of speaking out? We obviously read about a lot in, some publications that, coaches have lost the dressing room and stuff like that. What's that kind of look like from the inside? If you don't mind me asking. It can be a number of reasons, really. I don't think there's one set. Each dressing room, each club, each group of players will be completely different. And the term of losing a dressing room is quite harsh. It could be that results have had an impact. It could be that the manager's changed his style could have an impact. It could be that, a certain amount of injuries could have had an impact. It could be sometimes that players are human beings, and when you're not winning games, it does have such a draining effect that, emotions become high, people get agitated with each other, even to the point that managers do that. And it's very, very hard to control. So sometimes these stories can spiral out of control, because I suppose in any other workplace, if people started arguing with each other, it wouldn't be made a fuss of. But in football, it's
on display.
It's like a big shining light.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big shining light on it. And maybe because of, it's the Premier League, it's in the spotlight, and everyone's, wants to know what's going on, it becomes, really, really good news. So I don't think it's any different to any other working environment. The impacts, just the pressures and demands in football are a lot higher because they are in the spotlight. So emotions and negativity are going to run higher, and it will impact. It will impact.
You'd be surprised to know, David, Mrs. Pochettino, she's a big fan of our show here, and she wants to know why you followed Mauricio to Southampton and Tottenham.
Mauricio wasn't at Southampton when I was there initially. It was Nigel Atkins, and Nigel Atkins was there first of all, and Southampton got into the Premier League. Southampton then didn't do very well in results, and Mauricio was recruited because he was doing very well at Espanyol at the time. And because of Southampton had that sort of good success with Walcott, Bale, Luke Shaw, James Ward-Prowse, Chamberlain, because Mauricio was very good at bringing young players into a first team, and he had done very well with Espanyol and limited resources and limited budget, he thought he'd be a good fit. So he fitted in what Southampton was about at the time. And my colleague, when I went to Bournemouth, because I had the opportunity to because at Southampton I was sort of like a coordinator, so sort of mid-level management. Bournemouth had a chance to lead my own department, and because I had a successful period, I got the chance to work with Mauricio again, and a colleague, Paul Mitchell, again, who was sort of head of recruitment at the time of Tottenham. So it was good for me, because then when you go into a big club, you understand how Mauricio works. You understand what he wants in terms of players. So when even I went into a new club, I didn't have to sort of think, right, okay, how am I going to adapt? I knew instantly what was required. So when you get to know someone and you enjoy working with them in terms of, what they bring to the football club, as a manager, and especially as a recruiter at the time, it's very, once you understand what a certain person requires, and I really liked what he stood for in terms of his recruitment in players and how he wanted to develop. So it was very easy for me to go to take the opportunity back to Tottenham.
You're only a couple of doors down from Mauricio. What was the aura of Mauricio? And is there a story that makes you smile, or is there something that happened that you look back so fondly on your time at Tottenham?
Yeah, I think he was just, a really sort of humble, nice man. When he was on the training pitch, it was very intense. It was very dynamic. He liked to play what we call sort of a modern day high pressing style, really intense, really high transitions, really, a lot of physical demands. So, but when he came off that, he felt like he was just himself, with everyone. He was no different to me as he was to maybe the cleaning staff or the chef or anyone around him. He was quite maybe because he was sort of from that sort of Latin background where they like to sort of give you a hug, they'd like to know about your family, he liked to know about sort of you as a person, and he was like that with me, and he was exactly the same as with everyone. So it wasn't like a pretense act where this is my core staff, I'm only going to be. He was the same with everyone. He was natural, and I think that's what I really liked about him. On a training ground, completely different beast. Off it, a real gentleman. And I think that's, it's a lot of stuff that we can, especially for me, you can learn off of how you treat people.
So important to treat everyone in your staff. I think Sir Alex and all the top managers just have an amazing empathy for everyone that they come across with. And it still seems there's a little light burning between you both here, a bit of the bromance here. I'm sure Mrs. Pochettino still has you in the memory, in the heart here. But what I want to ask here, David, was thinking of the situation that your colleague Paul Mitchell has walked into at Monaco and being director of football there, and they've totally changed their philosophy and reinvented their approach from buying the best players in Europe to developing and finding the hidden gems in Europe. But I was trying to think from your situation, if you walked into a club tomorrow, what is something that you would do, and how would you stamp your imprint on the club and the dressing room?
Yeah, I think it depends on the club. So if you take into a similar sort of club that Mitch is in, like Monaco, and it had that philosophy of where Monaco probably 2-3 years ago was buying the best players around Europe, young and senior pros, and some good players have come from that, some players that probably haven't worked out. So my approach would just be to try and align it all together, because sometimes in football clubs, depends where the club was, and I'm not saying this is all football clubs in general. Sometimes you walk into a club and it's, you can see them the departments not all as one. And I think if you're going to be successful, especially for the first team, that you need every department working as one. So your first job is to try and bring them all together. If the philosophy of the club, and each club's different, if the club wants to play and do it this way, your job straight away is to try and get it all together. And you assess the situation really quick. Depends what type of year you're in, time of the year you're in. So you might have to make one of the biggest ones you do is recruitment in terms of players. So that would be because from the fans' point of view, they want to see players that want to play for the club. So your imprint would be, if you're going to do a department reshape, it would be from the recruitment perspective, first of all. From the coach's perspective, that's where your first 2 points you try and stand, because that's going to have the most impact. And then the surrounding departments that support that process. So you'd really try and get a grip of that early as much as you can, because if you don't get control of sort of the coaching and the way it's going to be embodied and the recruitment style, you can have the best analytical medical department, but if the top two are not in place, it makes it very hard for the others to sort of buy into that.
And we were wondering what from all your years of being around football, what is the craziest experience you've had in your career? Say it like a deadline day or something like that.
Yeah. I think all deadline days are manic, and it's sort of during certain transfer windows. It can be. My way of working is, if you're not prepared, you're then in the chaos factory in January, and if you're not prepared to, where your targets are and what you're going to do and what your strategies are and where you're going forward, you could end up in this sort of merry-go-round where you're at the mercy of other clubs, where you're at the mercy of agents. I wouldn't say there's a specific story. I just say that I've probably been involved in 2 or 3 sort of transfer windows where throughout my career, I've been chaotic, and they're not nice to work in, because everyone, their emotions are heightened, people become completely different. There's a lot of panic, especially sometimes maybe from ownership, maybe from the manager, even from myself. And I would say that the much you can prepare beforehand for these situations, so you're not at the mercy of maybe other football clubs, other agents, other players, where you're panicking and, you're trying to negotiate, but you're not in the driving seat, you have no control in it. It can be a horrible, horrible place to be in. So I would say there's 2 or 3 minutes that have been absolutely crazy. And even to the point where you've lost players at the last minute can be very hard to take, through various reasons, where another club has come in and kiboshed you, where they've come in and took the player right underneath your nose, or the player's done a U-turn, or even the owner's done a U-turn. So it's, and you've got to be, you've got to dust yourself down really, really quick and go again. And that can, all that can be really, really hard and stressful. So I think those situations would be a couple of what I'd highlight, the real sort of crazy times where you're in unpredictable chaos. So your job is to try and smooth that out before you enter it.
Speaking about Monaco and, the academy setup and that kind of thing, obviously a lot of players have come from the very famous Academy of Clairefontaine in France. Who would you say are the clubs that we should be watching at the moment that aren't necessarily big clubs, but they have a very strong academy setup? Like, who are obviously there's a few players coming from Germany at the moment to the Premier League. Who are the clubs that we should be watching in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I would say even clubs like another club in France have always done really well. Have been Lyon, have produced an excellent crop of players, and they believe in their system, so they would always have a crop year on year of top young talent coming through. I say Benfica probably over the last 4 or 5 years have been financially the best at selling their best top young players at 17, 18, 19. And they have a number of young players coming through as well. So Benfica, Lyon, Leverkusen's always been very strong. Hoffenheim's always been very strong. And I'd say even my time when I was in Scandinavia, because the way the markets work over there, maybe because the leagues are not as strong as sort of some of the top European leagues, some of the top talent, even as a team in Sweden, which is sort of a low division team called Brummerparken, and it's a team in Stockholm, and probably in the second or third league, that where it's situated on the outskirts is quite a tough area, and historically, if you look back at it, they, a lot of players, probably it's the highest selling club in Sweden, even though it's probably one of the smallest, of top young talent. Even going not just to other Scandinavian clubs, from players going to Bayern Munich, players going to Chelsea, players going to different ones in France. So sometimes it's little clubs like that where they're situated in the city, that they can produce a lot of these type of like street young players. And unless you've done your research, it wouldn't be a name on everyone's lips that everyone would think where they come from. But if you look at it, there's there's hundreds of top young talent probably over the last 10 years that have gone on to have really good careers and gone on to really good European clubs and some top European clubs.
Yeah, so much talent. I'm now going to Google them after this podcast. So appreciate it, David.
No worries.
We don't know if you have kids, David. We're not sure if this is a deadline day exclusive here. You did.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, I do.
You too. And I'm just imagining all the games and all the scouting you've done, knowing what you know now. And we can also include your other kid here, Wilfred Zaha. Do you think about how you would develop your kids from what you've experienced and learnt?
Yeah, of course. Definitely. I think I only have the one. I have a daughter, you definitely want to try and shape them in the right direction, because my upbringing as a kid was tough. I was brought up on a tough estate, and my family didn't have lots of money when we were children, and my dad became quite a good businessman not until sort of in my sort of mid-teens. So growing up in sort of like council estates and sort of tough environments really shaped me. Where my daughter now is, obviously she's not exposed to that. And obviously the way the world is now, it's very social media based. It's completely different to when I was a child, but you still want to try and keep the basics. So good manners, please and thank yous, good values, even though she's still very young, but just try and get the basics in early, just to try and shape a little bit. So, being well mannered, being polite, treat people well, as you want to be treated. So be nice to people, if someone's not nice to you, then obviously you have to respond. But if someone is nice to you, just try and keep the basics early on. And then as she gets older, try and shape that. I use this word a lot in this podcast, like resilience and hard work, because I'd imagine as she gets older and the way the world is now, it's going to become even more competitive. And I still think as the social media world we live in, that you still can't get away from that human value and contact and the way you are with people. That could be to give you the edge to maybe, get you a job, or it could give you an opportunity in life. So just to keep those sort of, those core values close, no matter, what her journey is or what her life is now.
And we're so glad we've been connected with you this evening, David. Thanks for sharing all your moments with us.
No, pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
Thanks for listening to the Glad You Knew Football Podcast. If you would like to know more about issues that matter to you, tune in to our Glad You Knew Politics Podcast. Also, don't forget to subscribe at Glad You Knew and at Glad You Knew Football on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you'd like to get in touch with us at Glad You Knew, email us at gladyouKnew@gmail.com. We think you'll be glad you knew.